another great episode right here on IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Ronnie Wong, and today we're taking a look at VMware VCP6. And we're actually in a part 2 of our troubleshooting tools, and we've got a lot more to go over, so I want to jump right into it. And in our studios, of course, to help us out, make sure we understand all that we need to, is Mr. Domzet. Welcome back to our studios.
Hey, Ronnie, thanks for having me back, and thanks for letting me continue on my ramblings of troubleshooting tools, because there are quite a lot of them. We're going to kick this one off with what I think is the most important tool. I know I mentioned logs in the last episode, and for me, when I start troubleshooting, logs are almost the first place that I go. Now, the summary screens on most of the devices inside of vCenter will show you snippets of the logs, usually the important snippets, so you get everything you need there. That's typically the first place you go. But after that, if I've really got to dig for the research, I don't normally go to the CLI. That's not where I go. I don't even start navigating through the tree if I have to. I prefer to go right to the logs. And there's a few different places where we can view those, so let's kind of run through them. vCenter, at its heart, is running on top of a Unix environment. And so, of course, it's going to have syslog, the system log system in the background, so that the system log daemon that's running and collecting information about our servers. So we can go and check that out and find out whether there's something wrong with our system. So for example, for me, if I browse into my vCenter server, right? So I'm going to go into my inventory list, and I'll pick my vCenter servers. And I'm going to pick my vCenter server. And then inside of my vCenter server, I'm going to go to Monitor. And under Monitor, we can jump over to System Logs, this guy right here, okay? That's going to be our syslog. And what you're going to see is the very detailed Unix-style logging that's maintained by the system under the hood, right? And this is for my vCenter server. You have a similar log being maintained for each of your ESXi hosts, or if you've got the PSC separated on that server too. Each one, you'll be able to go to the monitoring side and system logs and be able to dig down in there and see what's what. Now, it does do log rotation. So if I drop that list down, you'll see you'll have more than one log file, right? You'll have multiple log files if you've been running it for more than one day. It also breaks apart a few things like the alerts and profiler and different systems there. These log files are really useful for you to troubleshoot. You can also export them, which is really useful when you're working with support. When you're on the phone with VMware, they might say, hey, could you send me the system logs for your vCenter server? And what they mean is they want you to come here and export it so you can send it over to them. All right. Also notice how it's only showing me 2,000 of my 8,600 lines. If you look over here, you've got show the next ones, show all lines, and show line numbers. Those are a few different options we've got in there. But I'll be honest with you, it's pretty difficult to search through the logs from here, and show all lines is almost always a bad idea because you have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lines. So I'll usually export, load it up in Excel or something like Sublime Text where it can handle huge files, and then you can search right through it and find everything you need. So those are the syslogs right here. We can access them through this. We can do it through the command line interface too if you really want to. We can also tweak how detailed these logs are. So for example, if I go, let me go over to Manage and Settings. And under Settings, if I go under General, underneath General, you'll have your logging options right here. And see how my logging options are set to Info? That means it's going to give me informational, warnings, alerts, right? Anything more severe than informational and informational itself. If I edit this and I go down to those logging settings, you can tweak that. And you'll see that info is not the most detailed. We can go down to verbose. Verbose is going to give us really detailed information about what's going on in the system. And trivia, well, that one's going to give you everything, more than you ever want, right? So several different levels there. But we also have warning and error if we want to limit it to just more significant things. Info, those are things we need to know about, but there's no action to take. Warning, that's something that may not be a problem now, but it will be in the future, so there's probably an action to take. Error, that's something that's a problem right now, and you need to take an action. So at a minimum, we want warning and error, but info is the default. That means you get all three of these, right? And you can disable logging if you're crazy. That option is there. I would never do that, but the option is there. Okay, so those are some of the different things that we can do with syslog. It's kind of a nice thing. It's running, it's part of Unix, so it's going to be there, and it's up and operational. From the command line, let me switch over. Here I'm SSH'd into one of my ESX hosts, an ESXi host, and on the host, if you just go to /var/log, inside of that folder you'll see a bunch of log files, And the one that we're typically looking for VMware is this guy right here, vmkernel.log. So if I take a look at vmkernel.log, we'll see those same log entries all laid out here. Well, I was looking at my vCenter server a minute ago. This is an ESXi host, but same thing. You're going to find that information right there. All right. So a couple of different ways to see those log files and find out what's going on. Now, the biggest challenge with the log files is that they're usually big. There's usually a lot of data in there, and it's hard to figure out what's important and what's not. So what VMware did is they gave us another system to use, and that's the events and issues system. That if we go back to our vCenter server and we go to our monitor tab, I've kind of skipped over it, but you'll see these two buttons here, issues and events. Okay, events, those are kind of routine things that have happened on the system. I created a VM, or I deleted a piece of storage, or I rescanned some adapters. These are things that have already happened, right? And they're just events, maybe good, maybe bad. Here I got a bad one, right? I tried to log into an iSCSI target, and I got an error logging into the target. Well, why did I get the error? I don't know, right? Was it a bad password? Was the other host unreachable? Well, I can click on it, and then down here at the bottom, I get a little more detailed information. And so it's telling me log into this target failed, and then it says the iSCSI initiator could not establish a network connection to the target. I had a connectivity issue. This is iSCSI, right? So iSCSI uses our normal TCP/IP network. It tried to connect, and for some reason it failed, all right? And I can see that happened at 2:46 p.m., and I can look up ahead and see, oh, discovered a data store. So right on top of that, I've got discovered a data store, and I've got heartbeat and the data store being added, so it's already corrected itself. I can see the series of events as they played out. If the error were still there, I would jump over to issues and it would show up here. Okay. If I had a valid issue, it would show up here. If the issue was already resolved, it would disappear from here and it would just be under events. Now under issues, you can see like I've got a vCenter server health alarm, right? They're going to show up right here, and you can spot what that problem is. They show up a number of different places though. For example, back on my summary screen, if I have any outstanding warnings, there they are in this yellow bar. Or my alarm view up here, there it is too. 3 different places. So it's rare that I actually go into the one that I just showed you, because I've normally seen it one of these other 2 places first. And here I can see that I've got a vCenter health alarm, and it says that my VPXD status changed from red to yellow, right? VPXD, that's a storage device. And it went from red to yellow, which means it had an error. Now it just has a warning. Well, that's nice. I could acknowledge it so the system knows I'm working on it, or if I know it's already been fixed, I can reset it to green, and now the alarm goes away. If the issue still exists, the alarm's just going to reappear again, and then I can sort it out. But right now, I saw in the events that it was already resolved, and so I can clear that out. All right. The other one that I didn't mention were tasks. So when I went under monitor, issues, those are problems right now. Events, those are things that have happened in the past, including problems that may have resolved themselves. Tasks, those are activities that are being performed right now. And when you look, I've got a list of completed things, right? But I might be working in the system, and Ronnie might be working in the system at the same time. And if he does something, it'll show up under the tasks. And so if I see a data store go offline, I might say, ooh, problem with the data store. And then I look and I see that Ronnie is working on that data store. I'm like, oh, okay, not a problem. Ronnie's working with it. I'll leave it be. And any alert that gets generated, he can always go and acknowledge the alert, and that way I don't get a pop-up on my screen. Okay. If you want to know who did it, when you zoom in on this, if we go all the way over here to the right, you'll see there's this column initiator, and it'll show the username of who's doing it and the start time, like when they did it. So you get that information right here. And if it's completed, it'll have a completion time, but a lot of times they're going to be running, right? So they'll actively be running right now, and that's why we're kind of throwing an alarm. Now, it might be that our configuration is working, but it's just not working fast, right? Things might be slow or sluggish. We might be seeing intermittent issues, and that's where we want to monitor performance. And performance is pretty easy to monitor too. We're normally going to monitor that on our host. So I'm going to jump back over to a host, and I'll take ESX host 01, for example. So I'm going to take good old host 01, and when I go to manage it, there we go. We can go under the monitoring tab, and under monitoring, you've got performance right here. And I know we've looked at this in some of the other shows, but just to kind of cover it again, when you go to the performance screen, it's going to load up some charts right here to show me that performance. And I'm kind of stalling because it takes a minute to load. If your server's been running for at least a day, you should have some charts that show up here. If it's been running for less than a day, then you'll probably get an error. And you can drop this down and tell it to switch into real-time mode. And now it's going to show the last couple of hours, or actually I guess it's the last 2 hours, and it's going to show you some real-time data. So this is what's going on in the system right now versus the last few days, right? But now I can monitor CPU and memory and so on. Key thing to remember about this screen, the thing a lot of people forget, is this View tab right here. Under View, I'm set to Home right now, but if you drop that down, you'll see that I can flip to Virtual Machines, and now it's going to break up that performance by VM, and that's really handy because knowing that my host CPU is 100% is one thing, but knowing which VM it is, that's the problem, is more helpful because that's going to help me decide, oh, I need to move this VM to different hardware, right? I can shuffle things around if I know which VMs are the problem. This is what the distributed resource scheduler is using. So we can quickly troubleshoot performance issues right here. And it's not just CPU. You always want to pay attention to network, disk I/O, memory. Those are all things that are important. And so you may need to tweak these tables to get exactly what you want. And if you go into the advanced menu over here, you'll see where you have additional options where you can tweak that to see even more data. Right now it's showing me CPU by default, but if I drop that down, I can view data store, memory, network, power, disk, all those things, so I can figure out exactly where my bottleneck is and why the system is running slower than it should be. It's a great resource when it comes to troubleshooting performance, right? You also have this option, I always miss this one because it's kind of hidden away here, chart options, right? It's a tiny little link up at the top of the chart. And if you click chart options, you can manipulate all sorts of stuff. The time range, you can pick exactly what counters are being shown, so you can create hybrids of what's being displayed. Over here, you'll see all the different categories that we can pick from. You can customize this a lot. My word of advice to you, though, is if you customize it, make sure you do this save options as. You can effectively create a template that you can use over and over and over again. And when you save it, you can drop this box down and pick it, right? So if I save this, and I'm going to call it like Don's Custom Performance, right? So now when something goes wrong, I can come right into here. For chart options, I can drop it down, and I can choose Don's Custom Performance, and now the chart's going to be configured exactly the way that I want. And when I hit OK, that's going to re-display, and now it's done my way, right? You kind of figure out what works for your environment and what you need.
So Don, do we have the same option for something like a SAN, since we're actually connecting to our appliances there?
Yeah, these same charts right here work for a SAN. If you have an actual physical SAN, odds are they have performance counters that you can use that are going to be a little better. The negative side on that, if you monitor from the SAN side, it's going to show everything based on host. It won't show you the individual VMs, unless the SAN supports vVols, that would be the exception, but otherwise it's going to show you performance from the host side. From here, we can monitor it and we can see the individual VMs. If you have a vSAN, don't use either of these. If you have a vSAN, use the vSAN Observer. If you didn't catch the vSAN episode, jump over and check that one, and we covered the vSAN Observer there. So those are all different things that we can use to kind of monitor and see this stuff. It's very detailed. You can really dive in there and see what you need to see, and it's pretty powerful. All right, the only thing, let's see, what else do I have to mention here? High availability in DRS, right? Let's say we have a cluster. If you've got a cluster, now your servers are working in concert to achieve a goal, and it's possible you could have problems in your cluster. It happens all the time. You may see something like you go to view a cluster and one node has a red diamond on it, or one node has the yellow triangle and it isn't happy. So if that happens to you, you need to find out what's wrong with that node. And we can always come in here to hosts and clusters, and we can click on the cluster that's in question. And if you go to the summary tab, it'll normally tell you what's wrong with that node, okay? But look at my environment. I've got yellow warning flags on both of my hosts, but when I click on the cluster, there's nothing here, right? The cluster thinks that it's fine. It doesn't think that it has any problems. And if I go to monitor and issues, no triggered alarms, right? It's just, it thinks that it's fine. So sometimes looking at the cluster isn't good enough. Sometimes you do have to go in and take a look at the nodes. And if we go to the node and look at issues, now I can see what my issue actually is. See how we've got this, the number of vSphere HA heartbeat data stores for this host is 1, which is less than the recommended, which is actually 2. There we go. So I need more heartbeat data stores. So that's what it's warning me about. It says I've got no management network redundancy. So I've got problems, and the problem is tied to this host. It's not the cluster's fault. that this host is missing that data store. So I have to look at it from that host perspective, right? Another thing is there's some great cluster troubleshooting tools that are just not a part of the WebSphere client, the vSphere web client. On the vSphere native client, you have these really neat cluster maps. When you have a cluster, you've got the cluster, and you have more than one node inside of it, and then you have all these data stores that are attached to the cluster, and you got VMs that are attached to the cluster. They may not be attached to one node, they're attached to the cluster itself. And so having a map that shows what's connected to what can be really handy. The web client can't do it though. This is one of the times where there's something the native client can do that the web client can't. This series, I've used the web client almost exclusively, but if you want a map, you're going to have to use the native one. So let me jump over to my server. And here I'm in the vSphere native client. And in the vSphere native client, you can generate a map if you browse into your cluster. So I'm going to go to Host and Clusters, and I'm going to find my cluster right here, okay? And when you choose the cluster, see how I still have those warnings on my nodes just like on the web client, but if I go across these tabs up top, I'll find a tab called Maps. And if you choose Map, this is a neat one because what it does is it lays out the hardware that's involved in your cluster and tries to map it in a way that you can see it, right? Here's a VM that I have, WinClient01. And WinClient01 is tied to the VM network, is tied to my shared ISO data store, is tied to whatever data store this happens to be. If I float over it, it'll tell me my host 01 local data store, and it's attached to the host 01 host because it's using the local data store instead of the shared one. So up here, I see host 02, and see how there's no line from WinClient01 to host 02? That means host 02 cannot boot up this VM. Even though the VM's in the cluster, it can't boot it up over here because this client is running on this host's local storage. It's not on the shared storage like it should be. And if I look down a little bit, oops, or zoom out like crazy, then there's some of my shared storage right down here that I'm not using, and that's going to be a problem for me on this node, on this cluster, because I really should move the client to shared storage so that both hosts are able to see it, and then I need to enable vMotion on the VM kernel adapters so that we can do failover. When you look over here, this is where we pick what is being mapped, and right now it's doing host to VM, but you can change that around quite a bit and customize how it's going to be displayed, right? Right now it's set for virtual machine resources. I can do host resources, data store resources, custom map, so you can tweak that, and now I can see here's host 01 and all the stuff that it's connected to, the shared storage, the other host in the cluster, and so on. These little maps are handy to just get a visual representation of your configuration, but it is a feature of the native vSphere management client. It's not a part of the vSphere web client. All right, let's see, what other damage can we do here? We've seen that, we've seen the resource maps. vRealize, okay. All the things that I just showed you, all the things in part 1 and here in part 2, these have all been tools that are available for us to use, okay? But there's one big super mega tool that we haven't touched on, mostly because it's not really on the exam, vRealize. vRealize is part of the operations management software that we can purchase from VMware. It's an add-on, right? It's an additional feature that we add on. And what vRealize does is it does all this monitoring for us. All the different tools that I showed you in part 1 and all the different stuff we saw here, including these maps, vRealize monitors your system. And it can report back to you everything you need to know. It's a one-stop shop, one place that you go to get all of your data. Now, I don't have vRealize loaded on my system here, but if you do, back on your, I mean, you kind of see it already. If you go back to your home page, say you've got like the vRealize orchestrator, and way down here, we've got the vRealize orchestrator also. If we were to connect up to a vRealize environment, the way that it works is it hooks into all of your different vCenter and vSphere suite deployments. And then not only is it able to monitor, but it's able to take actions to correct things. It's able to move VMs around to ensure they're functioning. It's able to bring hosts into a cluster or take hosts out of a cluster. It's able to do a lot of stuff. It can handle all of your deployments. So when you deploy a VM, it makes sure they go to places where they actually got the resources available. vRealize Orchestrator works to automate all the monitoring and maintenance and things that we have to perform on a system on a normal basis. So that's a great way as your network grows and grows and grows. It's nice to know that we've got these tools, that we can come in and monitor things, that this resource is available to us. That's great. But if you've got 1,000 hosts you don't have that kind of time on your hands. And your hosts become disposable. If I have a problem on host number 211, I'm just going to move the VMs off it and delete host 211, format and reinstall, right? I mean, why even bother troubleshooting? I've got so many other hosts, I can just move the VMs off and that's it, right? So why not let VIA Realize do that for us? It can already move the VMs off if there's a problem, and then we can either correct the host or wipe it and rebuild. That's the kind of functionality that we have with that. So definitely a great product. A little on the pricey side for a small or a medium shop, so much so that it is worthwhile to just use the command line utilities. But it is certainly an option out there, especially for a larger organization. All right, Ronnie, I think that's a pretty good rundown. There are tons more troubleshooting tools. I think I've covered all the ones that you'll see on the exam and the ones that you're going to commonly use in real life. The other troubleshooting tools that are out there are a lot more specific, purpose-built for particular instances. One thing I do encourage you to do is to mess around with the ESX CLI, connect into a host, and just run ESX CLI help, and it'll show you a bunch of extra data on there. It has a ton of features. We looked at the storage and networking pieces of it, but it's got other ones. Definitely something to check out because you don't use it a lot in real life, and it is on the exam. But that gives you a pretty good rundown right there of what's available and how we can keep our systems healthy, happy, and wise.
All right, well, Don, thank you again for introducing us to a bunch of these tools. And even though we may be familiar with generic networking tools and some of the storage tools that we've looked at, as well as the high availability tools with each particular vendor, we noticed that inside of VMware we have a lot of these also built in to help us to actually be able to do some of those same things. So we did cover the idea of actually understanding logs are actually available to us. And Don said, hey, that's one of the most important things. I'll guarantee you as a troubleshooter, it is one of the most important things that you can ever take a look at. But if you're actually just beginning, you kind of overlook them because you're like, I don't want to look at all that stuff. But overall, though, it's a great tool for you to have and to take advantage of as well. We also, of course, talked about high availability and DRS, that distributed resource service that you can also take a look at there. And finally, we mentioned a little bit about the vRealize that it can help us to do just about everything else. A bit pricey for small to medium business sizes, but overall though, if you actually are having, like what we said, large numbers of nodes that you have to worry about, well, that's the way that you also take care of that environment too in terms of troubleshooting. Well, that's a great rundown again, Don. And that actually leads us to the end of this episode. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I'm your host, Ronnie Wong.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
And we'll see you next time.